So we're approaching 12, and I think it's a good time to get started. So absolute pleasure again to have our second event for this year for the YPPDO. Today we have the pleasure of having Jacob Gonzalez, who is the Senior Associate Director for Graduate and Postdoctoral Career Services at the Office of Career Services. So since 2021, Jacob's been helping graduate students, postdocs, find sort of a leverage in the career planning and giving guidance for folks like ourselves who are looking for guidance. He earned a BS in Biochem from California State University in Fullerton and holds a PhD in cell biology from Yale. Has also been involved heavily in microbiology for about 10 years or so, yeah. Much more of that. So after graduating, Jacob completed a postdoctoral fellowship in cancer biology at the University of California, San Diego. And in his spare time, he's either backpacking or hitting the trails on the mountain bike. So today, Jacob's going to give us a good overview on how to plan to manage your career development. So thanks again for having us, and thanks for being here.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for the intro. So as Fernando mentioned, I'm going to be talking more about how you can be planning and managing your career developments. So it's a small group. So if you have any questions, really informal conversation, but the goal here is to kind of give you a timeline and resources how you can be staying on top of your career development. And so while you're a trainee, it's really easy to kind of put this to the side. And the goal of the Office of Career Strategy would be advise PhD students and postdocs, but really to kind of stay on top of your career. And usually when you hear about your career development, I think sometimes people think, oh, well, I don't necessarily have to think about this until I'm like in my 4th or 5th year or when I'm actively on the job market. And we're trying to shift that mindset on different ways you can stay on top of this. So I'll talk about tangible ways where you can stay on top of this for your career development and kind of spotlight OCS as a resource, but there's a variety of different resources that really allows you to engage in career development. So there's these groups that exist here at Yale. There's student groups that I'll talk about that also do a really great job of different career workshops, but also your thesis advisors and your thesis committees. Don't overlook them as a resource. I think really starting the conversation there, as long as you kind of come in and as far as what you're looking for and open-minded to have those conversations, I think that should really be the first place that you start. So it's a little bit of OCS. So we have a staff of 19, but specifically in graduate and postdoctoral career services, there's a staff of 2. And so we essentially organize events and workshops and develop resources for over 4,000 students and postdocs. So you can imagine that we do this in a lot of different ways. We have a lot of different channels and resources, and I'll kind of talk about the different ways that we kind of reach you guys, making sure you guys get the information you need in this area. We do have a team of graduate fellows that you'll see around campus running events called Career Fellows, and they're really an asset to us, and they are graduate students like you. So, and they just want to kind of get more experience with project management. So if you're interested, if you're a graduate student, we take on fellows. They usually are part-time experiences, and I'm happy to chat about more. We have 2 different offices at 55 Whitney Ave, so it's not too far. We'll walk to get to the Wright lab. And we also have a satellite office at the McDougall Student Center. But to be honest with you, a lot of what we do is virtual. Graduate students prefer to watch things online these days, and even with our advising appointments, we predominantly see students and postdocs virtually. It's convenient for you guys. You don't have to travel across campus. Do this at the convenience of wherever you are at in your department. But as far as what we do, so we offer one-on-one career advising, really the bread and butter of what we do. You want to sit down and get really tailored advice on tangible steps, kind of stay on top of your career development. This is a really good way to do this. You don't have to be at any stage within your PhD program. We really meet with students at their first years all the way to their last year. So it really kind of comes down to when you're really ready to kind of sit down and have a conversation with one of our advisors. As Fernando mentioned, we each have our PhDs. So I have a PhD in cell biology from Yale, and then my colleague, who's the director, has her PhD in economics. So we're really familiar with PhD programs and making that transition, you know, whether you decide to stay in academia or whether you decide to pivot outside of academia. And I'll talk about the workshops and online resources. I'll kind of talk about the different ways you could tap into the resources in our office. As far as getting access to our advising appointments and our events, we have a platform that's called Yale CareerLink. I'll share my slides with Fernando. You can share it with the group, but these are all hyperlinked. This is a way where you can take a look at our workshops and resources that I'll be talking about in our advice and employment. So you essentially have access to me in Hunja 24/7. So you guys could always just schedule an appointment whenever you want. You'll see our full availability, and we usually post it for like a month of. So you're more than welcome to schedule an appointment. But as far as this presentation, I'm going to break it up a little bit into the 4 components of what we think leads to a successful job search. And the main 4 areas that I'm going to break the talk into is self-reflection, and we'll talk about how you can actually start thinking about your own skills and your interests and how that can be used to start to explore different career paths. And how you can learn more about roles by first self-reflecting on what you enjoy about your PhD program or your postdoc. We'll talk about networking on how you can start building connections and how you really can take advantage of these connections to, 1, to learn about opportunities, but 2, how you can network your way into companies or even in the academic environment. There's a lot of networking that is involved if you're thinking about pursuing a tenure track role. We'll talk about more of your professional narrative, where at the end of the day, you have to pitch yourself to different audiences in regards to where you want to go. So whether you want to stay in academia, you got to pitch your research to different departments, or whether you want to pivot away, you got to talk to different companies about your interests and why you're interested in them. And then we'll talk more about the job application. So this is where a lot of graduate students, postdocs, they think of OCS when they're actively applying for jobs. And that's one thing that we do. We coach you throughout that process when you are applying for jobs or fellowships. We provide that tailored feedback on your application materials. So I'll talk a little bit about that. So I like to start this talk by always talking more about the transferable skill sets that you guys have. And this is often overlooked. Usually when you think about your PhD training, you first think about your technical skills, your subject matter expertise, but then there's also these transferable skills that you develop. Your postdoc, you're honing these transferable skills. And so there's many here that you probably look at on the slide, you'd be like, yep, I probably have done that, or I have some experience in that. So whether it be project management, working collaboratively with your colleagues or other labs, being a problem solver, your analytical skills, there's these transferable skills that you have. And this is what employers look for. This is why you see a lot of PhDs pivot away from academia. But if you decide to go down this tenure track role, it's why you succeed as an academic professor. It's these transferable skills that allow you to do that. Now, when you look at what companies are looking for, there's this misconception with students, postdocs, that they're looking for your subject matter expertise. And that's actually not the case. It's the transferable skills that they're looking for. And so this is a study that's done every year by LinkedIn. They gather all the data that they get from employers that post information on their platform. And they ask, what are the essential skills that these companies are looking for? And it's not technical skills, subject matter expertise. It's these transferable skills that I mentioned on my previous slide. So for this study, they showed that it was creativity, persuasion, collaboration, adaptability, and emotional intelligence, or EI, which is a fancy way of saying you just know how to perceive the emotions of your colleagues and navigate that in a work environment. So just keep in mind, it's the transferable skills that allows you to pivot, whether you decide you want to stay in academia or whether you want to go outside of academia. But the question becomes is how do you actually market that to employers, right? So you may be relevant, or you may be aware that you have this transferable skill set, but where the challenge is that a lot of trainees don't really know how to communicate that when they're talking to employers, or even in the academic environment too, right? But really, the first place that it all begins, whether you decide to stay in academia or outside, is the self-reflection part, right? And this is where it's often overlooked by a lot of trainees. They don't necessarily think about their own interests and their values and how that plays into this whole job search process, right? And making sure you find a role that's a good fit for you. And this is a good place to start by assessing your skills and your interests. And you probably would know this by your individual development plan. For a lot of people that are in the sciences, you have this IDP that you fill out. Hopefully you're chatting with your advisor about it. But there's a section on career development, right? And I think this is a good opportunity for you to think about, what you enjoy about your training program, things that you thrive off of, things that you find draining, and how you can use that information to find, different career paths that may be a good fit for you. So it all starts there. And so while you're a student, while you're in your postdoctoral role, a good way to start thinking about this is thinking about what functions do you enjoy doing, what problems do you enjoy working on. And as you start to think about that, you'll get a better idea of the roles that would be a good fit. And I'll talk about as you have conversations with people on these different roles, they're going to talk about, well, you know what, if you have a good analytical skill set, I think you'll thrive in this environment. Or if you're good at writing, I think you may enjoy this role. But if you find the things that you don't enjoy in your PhD program, so maybe you don't like public speaking, or maybe you don't like sitting in meetings, then I think that's really going to help you define, different roles that will be a good fit for you. Okay. The other thing is thinking about the skill sets, right? So we talked about that there's technical skills and subject matter expertise. But it's also thinking more about the transferable skills. Where do you thrive off of? What skills do you enjoy leveraging, using, and utilizing? And the more and more you think about that, that will also help you in the career exploration process and finding that role that's a good fit for you. The priorities is often overlooked. And so I've been in the career services for 7 years, and you'll be surprised by a lot of the conversations start off with, you know what, I'm looking for a real job. I need a lucrative role. I have a family. I actually want to start to have kids. I want to find a role that allows me to do that. How that drives the career process, the career planning process. And it's not so much the skills that you want to utilize, but it's a lot of the values that you want to bring to the role. So don't overlook that, but I think that it comes down to just self-reflecting, thinking about that, asking yourself these questions, and it evolves too. So when you start asking these questions now, when you're getting ready to finish your program or your postdoctoral role, more than likely those are going to shift a little bit. So just keep in mind that that's the way to kind of stay on top of, thinking more about roles that will be a good fit for you. But also in the career planning process, that's how you set up your concrete goals that you're able to achieve by the self-reflection part. In regards to how to do this and tools that we have, there's these self-assessment tools that you could utilize. There are several that are here that allows you to fill out a self-assessment, and it's really intuitive. And then they give you certain career paths that may be a good fit for you. So if you are, up in the air, whether you want to stay in academia, this is a good way to kind of assess, what skills you have and what skills you enjoy using, and potentially career paths that may be a good fit for you. And usually the way this works is that once you fill this out, usually trainees will come to us in their advising appointments and be like, hey, I filled this out. I found that I really like doing X, Y, and Z. Do you have any ideas for me on what career paths would be good fit? And that's where really we start to lay out, well, maybe you should explore this, or we know this person, you should connect with this person. To really kind of take a deeper dive into what career paths that are out there that will be a good fit for you. All right. The one that you're probably more familiar with is the MyIDP. Which is the individual development plan. So if you want to take a look at that, but there's another one that is Imagine PhD that you have access to, which is also a really valuable way to learn about career paths. And they have a really self-intuitive self-assessment tool that you could take a look at. So once you start to analyze and explore more of your skills or interest in your values, and the next step is to start exploring different career paths. Being in an academic environment, it's pretty straightforward, how to kind of stay on that track. I think it becomes more of, well, if you don't want to stay in academia, or if you do, but you want to have that parachute of if it doesn't happen to work out, when you get a tenure track role, well, what's that fallback? What's that parachute that's going to allow you to find a role that's going to be fulfilling? And so a good way to stay on top of this is by exploring now as a student, as a trainee, while you're here at Yale, different career paths that are a good fit. And there's a variety of different ways that we help you do that, but also how you can kind of take, advantage and more of an initiative on how to stay on top of your career exploration. So we have our online resources on our website that you can take a look at. We run a lot of these workshops and we record them. We have different events with alums that we do, where we bring people that have their PhDs, but they pursue different career paths. And those are mostly they're recorded, and we put them online. So we usually share them in our newsletter. So we send out a weekly newsletter, and it's a good way to kind of just stay on top of, what events are going on and different PhDs and alums that are willing to come here and share their different career paths. As I mentioned, we do host a lot of campus events. There's one event that you should definitely go to that's actually really timely, which is called Where Do I Go From Yale? Have you guys received the email about that from the graduate school? I see a couple months. So essentially, this is a group of alums that they sit on a committee. It's called the Graduate School Alumni Association. And every year they plan this big event. And these are PhD alums that have gone into so many different career paths. They come together every year and they share more about their own. And so if you're thinking more about, what is out there for me, even if academia is a plan A for you, you just want to explore, other opportunities that are out there. This is a go-to event that it's planned for you. You show up, you listen to what the alums have to say, and it's a really great opportunity, I think, to connect to alums. So they're doing a series of virtual sessions starting April 1st, and then they're doing an in-person event where all the alums can come together on April 12th. So keep an eye out for that, because I think that's a timely event, because outside of that, really comes on to you to reach out to people that you want to, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's definitely more of a time management on your side. While you're doing your research projects, you're going to be reaching out to people. So we try to bypass that for you, where you can attend a lot of events that we organize. So it gives you an opportunity to just learn, the different career paths that are out there, right? So networking is a good way to do this on exploring career paths. I'll talk more about the logistics of that, because I know that's really a big term when people say you can network, but I'll break that down. And another way to explore different career paths are part-time experiences on campus. So there's more of these for graduate students. So there's the Graduate Professional Experience Fellowship, the GPE Fellowship. Have you guys heard of this before? It's a part-time experience where you get to work in an office at Yale. So if you want to hone in on your communication skills, your project management skills, whatever it may be, different offices at Yale take on a fellow. You work part-time, 6 to 8 hours a week. You get a stipend for it. And it allows you to explore, something outside of the research environment. If you're interested in building on a skill set that maybe you want to hone in on. So really great time, great opportunity, part-time experiences. I mentioned we have fellows, that falls under the YPPDO fellowship. And then if you wanted to pursue an internship, we support that. If you're thinking about pursuing the traditional summer internship which we get a lot of PhD students that do that. I'm happy to chat about other opportunities for postdocs, but part-time experiences is a great way to explore all other career paths. I'll just quickly mention, if you're thinking about other ways to explore career paths, job postings is a great way to do this. So if you have a functional role that you have in mind, or maybe you spoke to an alum in your department, they got off to work off as like a data scientist. A great way to learn more about those roles is by typing that in on LinkedIn and then looking at the job posting. And what's really valuable about that, you not only get to learn about the role, but also the skill sets that you need in order to break your way into that. And that's a great way to start thinking about what skills you actually need to build upon while you're still here at Yale. Because there's a lot of resources that I'll talk about to build certain skills you may be lacking, depending on what you want to go into. So I did mention networking as far as learning about careers. So I'll talk about the logistics of it, but don't underestimate, I think, the network that you have here at Yale. So the Graduate School Alumni Association is one example how alums are willing to have conversations with trainees. And even if you reach out blindly to somebody, which I'll talk about how to do, it's a great way to learn about different career paths. And this is just a subset of what you see a lot of life science and even the physical science PhDs and postdocs go into. And a lot of this is your transferable skill set that allows you to pivot into these different areas, right? And I'm happy to chat about any one of these, but this kind of just gives you a snapshot of what you see or what I see as well. A lot of PhDs and postdocs going into if they decide to pivot away from academia. So the networking part, I'm curious, how many of you just have received that advice that you have to network here at Yale at some point during your training, right? So there's a lot of value to networking, and we have dedicated workshops on this, but I think more the logistics of it, it's kind of vague, where you really receive the advice of like, networking is the important thing you have to do to land a job, but the how is kind of like a blank box. And I'll break that down a little bit, but just to kind of set it up of what the importance of networking. So I talked about learning about career paths, that's one way to network. But the other way that it's really valuable is that a lot of people will first hire people at companies, even academia, people that they know, through word of mouth. And this depends on what sector you apply to, but if you're thinking about consulting, finance, the tech sector, 50 to 80% of those people will fill their roles through networking, right? And they usually will chat with people in their network, and then they will learn about, who's a good fit for certain roles. And if they're not able to find somebody, then that's when you see the job postings online. So the goal here is to chat with people, learn more about their career paths. And as you do that, usually job opportunities come up through those conversations. But what I find and what studies have shown is that a lot of people do the opposite. They actually will spend most of their time applying to jobs online, and there's a drawback to that. Not saying that you can't find a job by applying online. I work with a lot of PhDs and postdocs that found jobs that way. But the disadvantage of that is that when you submit your resume and applications online, you're going to go through an AI software. You're going to scan your resume. And if you don't have the keywords on your application, you're going to get booted out of the system. So you have to be a little more strategic the way that you craft your applications if you're applying online. If you know somebody, well, you bypass all that. You actually go directly to the hiring manager, and the quality of your application becomes a little bit more or less important in regards to making sure you're able to have the keywords on your application and whatnot. When people say you need to tailor your application. So there's a lot of value to networking, and don't underestimate that. I think as you approach this process, I think you definitely want to make sure you're leaning into your connections. And that's also including your advisors too. They have a network of colleagues and a network of trainees that have gone up to do many things. So I think that should definitely be one way you should take a look at. Don't underestimate your department. I would reach out to your registrar's office and ask if they have an alumni list. Usually that's a good place to start when you're reaching out to people, thinking more about your immediate network. But then outside of that, then there's the secondary network that people talk about, the Yale network. And I'll talk about how to identify people in different ways, but these are going to be really the main ways that you're going to first identify people. And that's going to be the first step.
Sorry,
Go for it.
when you talk about the department alumni list, do you mean like individual people? Not like a blast, hey, I'm looking for a job, right?
No, yeah. So it's a list of people because, and we'll talk more about the logistics. So when you're reaching out to somebody, and when I say that you need a network, you're not reaching out to people saying, hey, I'm looking for a job. Do you know of any opportunities? That's a quick way to be like, nope, delete. You know, the way to do it is you first ask more about their advice on what they would advise somebody going into this role. What's the best way to get your foot in the door? And then you're seeking advice from them because they have kind of paved the way. When you have the conversation, there's ways you can allude to, you know, if there's any job options from the company. Yeah. Yep. So the reason why I talk about being proactive about networking is because there's a lot of resources here at Yale you can take advantage of. And so there's these platforms that you can utilize that I'll go through now. That's called Cross Campus, which is a mentoring platform. So alums sign up on there because they want to mentor students. So it kind of breaks down that barrier of sending those cold emails. LinkedIn is also another way to tap into the Yale network. And then First Shift is one that's specifically available through OCS that allows you to find somebody's company email address. And that's going to be the preferred way you're going to reach out to somebody. LinkedIn is the default. But there's a character limit and not everybody checks their LinkedIn. So if you can get the person's company email address, that's going to be the primary way you're going to get a good response rate. So I know I'll talk more about these three platforms. So let me shift screens really fast. I'm going to bring these up and show you how to kind of navigate this. So I'm going to start off with LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is a really powerful tool. If you don't have a LinkedIn account, you don't have to be active on LinkedIn, but as long as you have a profile with a professional headshot, your experiences, really where it comes in value, or it's really valuable, is when you want to identify people and when you want to reach out to somebody. So when people say you want to tap into the Yale network, so if you type in Yale University in the search filter, every institution has their own alumni network. So if you have an undergraduate degree from a prestigious institution, or for those postdocs, maybe you did a PhD at a prestigious institution, or there's an alumni network there, you could always tap into that alumni network in the same way. But essentially, when you go here, you have the ability to search people based off of where they live, which, thinking about the priorities, right? If I hear this priority, I want to live in New York City, or I have a spouse, I'm restricted to this geographical location. This is one way you can start to identify people in different regional areas. You could find people that are working at certain companies. So if you know of a company that you want to work at, first thing I'd recommend doing is going on here, see if there's a Yale connection. And it gives you a way to identify people that work at different companies. Or if you want to find people that you'll go over here on people, what they do and what their skills are, or what they study here at Yale, there's different ways you can identify people. There's also this way where you could search for people based off of keywords. So let's say that you're interested in becoming a data scientist, and you want to find people that have their PhDs. You could always use these keywords And then you can start to find people that are data scientists that have their PhDs in different areas. And I'm just going to click on Kevin really fast. So let me click on Kevin. And what's really valuable about LinkedIn is you actually get to see their career trajectory, essentially how they work their way up. Little tip, when you reach out to somebody, you want to reach out to somebody that's more in a senior or managerial role, because they're going to be in the position to make hiring decisions. If you reach out to a recruiter, sometimes they're valuable, where they essentially will tell you more about roles, but the hiring decisions are made by the hiring managers. So that's a good way to kind of reach out to somebody that's kind of worked their way up. This guy's in a senior level role, which is good. If you're interested in learning more about a role, this would be a good person to reach out to. And then they also have their PhD in psychology. Data science, you see a lot of people go from different disciplines. But so let's say you want to connect with Kevin, you could always send a LinkedIn message. There's a character limit, but a better way to do that is going to be their company email address. So you want to try to identify their company email address. There's this platform that's called CareerShift that you have access to. So essentially you could go over to Kevin. So you could just type in Kevin really fast. Let's see if this works. And let's see what company is that really fast.
Do they have to sign up?
They do not. So this is a service where they actually collect all this information. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I have actually alternatives. So let's say that if you decide you're going to do this via Yale, for shift, you have to be an active student or postdoc. But if you leave Yale at some point and you want to utilize this in some way or form, there's other platforms you can utilize. Make sure I have that. So this didn't come up. You can take a look at different ways. So sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't, but I'll show you an example of just the first and last name. And so let's say if you want to connect with somebody at Alaska Marine Lines, whatever it may be, if you go over to contact details, you're going to be able to find their email address right here, right? So, and that's going to be the primary way that you want to reach out to somebody. Sometimes it's not the most perfect system, so you may have to use their last name and then the company. So you can mess around with it a little bit, but for the most part, from my experience, 80% of the time it'll work. Once you identify somebody on LinkedIn.
These are all Yale alumni?
No.
Oh,
this is worldwide. So let's say that if you go into LinkedIn, so let me go back to LinkedIn. Let's say if you're interested in a company, and let's try this more. Let's say you find a company you want to work for. You'd find that there's no one in the Yale network. Another way to find people you want to connect with, which you could reach out to somebody outside the Yale network. You could always go to the company on LinkedIn, and you could go over here to people, and you have the same access to all the filters that I just showed you. So you could always try to find a data scientist at a company that you're interested in, or whatever functional role you're interested in. And then from there, you could always then go on to CareerShift, find their company email address, send an outreach email to set up an informational interview, which I'll talk about what that is. It's a really useful platform. I'm going to quickly mention Cross Campus. Because Cross Campus, essentially, this is a mentoring platform that you have access to. And so essentially alums, they will sign up for this saying, I want to help students with X, Y, and Z. And they come from a lot of different areas. So if this loads, and if not, that other is. So you could always find people in different industries. A little laggy right now. But what's really helpful about this, if you go over here to help topics, and if you want to find somebody that's willing to help you with your personal branding, or to review your resume, or to help with pursuing a second degree, whatever it may be, it kind of narrows down alums that are willing to connect with you in that way. So it kind of breaks down that barrier of you reaching out to somebody and having that crafted email. Essentially, you would reach out to somebody and be like, hey, I saw your profile. I saw that you're interested in helping students with X, Y, and Z. I would love to kind of chat with you for 20 minutes. So that's also another great platform to identify people. Any questions on that? All right. Let me go back to my slides. So that's how you identify people when you're thinking about reaching out to somebody to network. The questions now is like, how do you actually network? So the terminology you'll see that is used in the business way is informational interviews. curious, have you guys have heard of this term before? Informational couple mods? No? Okay, so it's a term that's used in the US, but essentially this is a way where you could reach out to somebody, not asking for a job, but you're asking to learn from them on how they paved the way into a certain role, any advice that they would have. And the way that you would ask for that is by setting up an informational interview. It's strictly informational. So you're not asking for a job, you're asking for advice and insight. These are short conversations, 20, 30 minutes. What's nice about Zoom now is that you can do this worldwide, but if you wanted to meet somebody in person, like let's say if you want to find a job in New York City, you're going to be in the area, you could always request to do an in-person meeting over coffee. A resume is not required, but it's recommended. And the reason why I say that, if you think about what I talked about the networking now, people usually will first look in their immediate network when they're hiring somebody. Usually when you have these conversations, and if they think that you're a good fit for a role, they're going to ask for your resume. Send me your resume. I know somebody that's hiring, or send me your resume. I'll circulate it through my team to see if there's any good roles. So that's usually how the conversation ends. And if you don't have a resume and you're scrambling to put together one, it's just going to be more stressful. So it's not required, but it's recommended that you have an updated resume, and a CV could work too, but it depends on what you're applying to. You want to come in prepared with questions. So I'll talk about what questions you could ask. And then you always want to send a thank you note right after this. And so a lot of the questions that I always get is, why would somebody want to connect with me? I'm a PhD student. Why do I have to offer? And really, it's more the gratitude. People are willing to help. And it's really just you coming in with the gratitude to show them that you're really thankful for their advice. And you do that by a thank you note. It's common business etiquette. So as far as questions, this is also another question that comes up. What questions would I ask when you're having these conversations? So I mentioned that a good way to do this is by learning about career paths, learning more about different work environments and whether it's a good fit for you. So that's a good way to narrow down what you're interested in. So you could always ask, like, if you would like a career in X, like, what is the best next step for me? What's most valued in your role? You could learn more about what skills you need in order to break your way into this role, so you can start to develop those skills. But where you really start to shift the conversation is asking, not for a job, but hey, what's the best way to get my foot in the door here? Is there anybody else that you could connect me with that would be helpful to learn more about X, Y, and Z? What other organizations would you consider I look into based off of my interests? So this is how you start to tap into their network. And usually when you ask these questions, the scope of the conversation changes a little bit. Oh, you know what? I actually know somebody that's hiring. Send me your resume. Or let me connect you with X. I think they would be really helpful with you learning more about X, Y, or Z, right? So, and really the questions matter when you start to come in because you want to take advantage of that time that you have with them. So the other thing I get asked is more of like, well, how often do I reach out? Do I send a follow-up email? And you'll be surprised, the most common mistake is that when people actually do this, they'll send one email out, they won't hear it back, and they'll take that as a no. And the better way to approach it is you send a follow-up email. There's this 10-day outreach strategy that was done by a group that asked professionals, like, what's the preferred way that they would ask to be reached out? And they came up with this 10-day outreach strategy. So essentially the way this works is that you start off with day one, you send an email out, and we have emails that you could actually take a look at that I could email you guys. But essentially you craft a really concise email. I would recommend doing this in batches of 5 because this takes time to do. And you want to make sure that you want to expedite the process when you want to reach out to somebody. Do this in batches of 5, send one email out. You don't hear back within 2 business days, you send another email. I just wanted to follow up on my previous email. I'm really interested in learning more about X and your advice. Please let me know when's a convenient time to connect. You don't hear back within another 2 days, send a LinkedIn message. The reason why LinkedIn is a default because you have a 200 character limit when you connect with somebody on LinkedIn. So you don't have really a lot of room to say why you want to connect with them, which is why I say the company email is the primary way to go. You don't hear back within another 2 business days, send one last email. And then if you don't hear back by day 10, you just move on. All right, so here's a strategy you could use when you're sending out these emails. And you'll be surprised, the response rate, when I work with a lot of PhDs and postdocs, 80 to 90% is the response rate when they're following this strategy. But it really kind of comes down to the type of email that you write. You want to make it sure it's really, really concise.
Why do you have that put in?
So that's if you wanted to kind of give a last hairy mail, like to connect with somebody, and let's say like this is like the ideal person you want to connect with, a traditional letter through the mail could work. totally up to you. It's based off of personal preference, but a simple follow email too. I think that could do it as well. I see people do phone calls too, because on cruise ship you can find people's phone number, leave them a message. So it depends on how comfortable you are. I know for Gen Z, I think phone calls, are not common etiquette, these days. There's a lot of anxiety that's wrapped around it, but depending on who you're reaching out to, that's the common way of communicating with people, depending on how fast you want to get a response time. So something to consider. So just to wrap up more of the outreach. So outreach tips. When you're reaching out, not asking for a job, you're asking for information. If you're thinking more about subject lines, Yale PhD students seeking career advice. So it's an easy way to kind of get a hit on people opening up your emails. You want to be professional, send follow-up thank you notes within 24 hours. Be organized. You can reach out to alums, but if they're not within the Yale network, reach out. I think people are always willing to have these conversations, and it's common business practice. End of the day, people do this. It may seem unfamiliar to you, it may seem uncomfortable, but it's a skill. The more you practice it, this is how people connect. This is when people say you need a network, that's how you know, right? Those are the logistics on how you approach it. And I'm happy to chat more about that. Moving on, so in regards to the professional narrative, so when you chat with somebody, they're gonna first ask, well, how about you tell me about yourself? And so this is a challenge for a lot of PhD students and postdocs because they want to talk about their research for 5 or 10 minutes. And when they say, tell me about yourself, they want to know 1 or 2 sentences, what you're doing at Yale and why you want to connect with them, right? So, and you want to make sure these are short conversations, 20, 30 minutes. So at most 2 minutes should be more of your elevator pitch. And the rest is just asking them questions about their career path, advice that they would have, those questions that I gave you. So the more and more you practice the professional narrative, the better prepared you're going to be. Even in the academic environment, when you go on an academic job search, you're going to have to give your short elevator pitches to everybody that you meet when you start to do on-campus interviews. So the more and more you practice this and thinking more about your audience, the better it's going to be. But essentially, what is an elevator pitch? It's pretty much just like a quick pitch of who you are, what you do, and why you do it. And thinking about your audience is really important because usually you would want to kind of talk more about the value you bring to an employer, and also why you're interested in them, the motivation for why you want to work for them. And you'll be surprised, a lot of people overlook that, the motivation on why they're interested in the company. They'll definitely miss out on that during the interviews. As far as the components of the elevator pitch, we give full dedicated workshops on this, but essentially you start off with your research, describing your research, but in a really, really concise way. The goal here is really to connect your experiences to the person that you're chatting with. And I think that's a struggle for a lot of people. So when I talk about knowing your transferable skills and what you enjoy using, if you're thinking about pivoting away from academia, usually that's, I went through a PhD program, I really enjoy writing, and I started exploring career paths in science writing. I saw that you're doing this, I want to learn more about this. Connecting your experiences to the person that you're chatting with. So that's a good way to kind of think about your elevator pitch beyond your research. Cut out the jargon. Sometimes you got to think about your audience, but it's really concise, 2 minutes at max. And it really varies on who you're chatting with and what environment, because at conferences or career fairs, you only have 30 seconds, so a minute to talk about your elevator pitch. So it really varies, but the more and more you practice this, the better you're going to get. And then I'm happy to chat more about elevator pitches, but we have a full hour-and-a-half workshop that we do if you're thinking about how to craft your narrative. These are just some go-to resources to get started on this. If you're thinking about designing your narrative and you want to do it on your own time, a couple quick resources to kind of get started on if you're unfamiliar with this. So we talked about exploring career paths. We talked about narrowing down roles that may be a good fit for you and doing informational interviews. The next step is identifying those skills that you need to build upon. And the reason why I say that you want to plan your career development is because the more that you are able to stay on top of this and identify roles that you may be a good fit for, let's say you do a couple of informational interviews and you know that you need to build a certain skill set, while you're training here at Yale, you have a lot of resources to build different skills. And the goal here is to tap into that. Because once you leave Yale, depending on where you go off to, those resources may not exist at those institutions that you're going to join or a company. And I'll talk about what those resources are. But the point here is that you want to identify the skills that you lack and then find ways to build those skill sets. So when you go on the job market, you're competitive for the roles that you're applying to. So these are just a variety of different ways on how you can build different skill sets. So as I mentioned, there's these part-time experiences here at Yale that are fellowships. If you're interested in early stage companies, startup companies, Sci City, they do some amazing program and they connect with a lot of entrepreneurs and startup companies. If you're interested in more science communication and science writing, there's different ways you can practice that here at Yale through 30-minute thesis competition or the postdoc symposium. If you're interested in consulting, the Yale graduate consulting clubs, there's different super organizations that do a lot of programming. And I wouldn't overlook those. They have amazing resources, especially for the graduate consulting club. The Yale Biotech Club, if you're interested in the life science sector, they're doing a career fair that's coming up as well. And they're doing a datathon right now. They have a program that they do every year. So the Yale Biotech Club is also another great organization that do a lot of programming you can take advantage of. I'll just point out a few others. LinkedIn Learning, you have access to learning different skill sets on LinkedIn Learning as a student and postdoc. So let's say you're interested in data science and you have the programming languages, but maybe you're lacking working with databases or lacking in statistical tools. LinkedIn Learning is a quick way to speed yourself up on that. So different ways you could just build a skill set. Here are a few examples you could do that, but always happy to chat more about different ways to build different skills. Any questions at this point? Let me see how I'm doing on time. All right, I'll wrap things up in a little bit. So the next step, which is if you're thinking more about the 4 pillars of the successful job search, the bottom right-hand corner is more of applying for jobs, crafting a strong job application material. So after you explore career paths, you chat with people, you narrow down what you want to apply to, maybe you kind of dabble and build the skill that you're lacking. The next step is to start finding jobs, right? And this varies, the timeline varies based off of what you're applying to. And this is where it's really helpful to chat with an advisor, because if you're thinking about going to consulting, they have a timeline that's expedited. They are hiring now in July for full-time roles that start the following year. Finance sector also functions like that too. So based off of what you're applying to, we are aware of the timelines because we talk to different employers. So it's always helpful to kind of talk to one of the advisors. I would say a year and a half in advance of your graduation or the end of your postdoc appointments, because that will allow you to plan effectively when you're going on the job market. So once you start to find jobs, we talked about different ways to do that through networking. You can go on to our platforms. We have job opportunities there. We have a whole bunch of career fairs that we organize in different sectors. So we give you different ways to find jobs. And when you do that, then it comes down to crafting your job application materials. And I'm going to circle back on the narrative because it all starts off with a professional narrative. This creeps into all aspects of your job application materials. Your resume, when you craft a cover letter, if you have the opportunity to submit a cover letter, and throughout the interview, you're going to be talking more about how your experiences relate to the role. It comes down to your professional narrative. So the more and more you start to think about that, that will be helpful for you drafting your job application materials. You're going to have to submit a resume at least when you're submitting jobs. And there's a confusion amongst trainees that your CV is a resume. And they're used interchangeably sometimes, but when you're thinking about jobs outside of the academy, more than likely you're going to need a professional resume. And there's a difference. It's not a CV. And these are just a few ways that kind of distinguish a CV from a resume. Are you guys familiar with this? You guys know what a professional resume is? Yeah, a couple months. All right, cool. So really just a concise version of your experiences. Really different from a CV, but a CV is a good way because it's almost like a master list of all your experiences. And it's a good way to kind of trim that down to a professional level. So as far as OCS, we offer resume advice, and there's different ways you could get that advice. So we have our online tips and tools. We have templates you could download. And the reason why I say the templates are really important is that I go back to circle back on that AI software that I talked about. It's called applicant tracking system. So when you submit a job online, more than likely it's going to go through an AI software. And templates are actually really helpful because if you have a headshot or if you are using a CV, it's going to get hung up in the system and you're not going to get past to the recruiter. So it's always good to start off with a template, and we have templates that are really ETS friendly. So I'd say I would recommend that. We also have a tool that's called Big Interview. And essentially this allows you to scan a posting. So let's say you find a job posting. put the job posting in there, you scan your resume, and it actually will give you tips on how to tailor your resume to that specific role. So also another valuable tool that we recently invested into this past year. And if you want to talk to an advisor, you're more than welcome to schedule an advising appointment, and we will give you feedback on the resume. There's different ways you could learn more about cover letters and resume examples. So there was this self-assessment tool that I mentioned, Imagine PhD. What's really cool about it is that they actually will give you a job description. They show you examples how you can tailor your resume and tailor a cover letter. And they're all examples from PhDs. So also another valuable tool if you want to see how you tailor your application from a traditional CV. So they're also a valuable tool to utilize. So once you submit your job application, then it's going to come down to interviewing. And similar to networking and your professional narrative, it's a skill that needs to be practiced. And all to say is that we offer a lot of tools to do that. We have our advising appointments, big interview. There's also a mock interview tool on that platform that you can utilize. So it's a good, convenient way to practice your interviewing skills in your own. But we often will work with a lot of PhDs and postdocs throughout the interview process and coach them throughout that process. Because if you're applying for technical roles, you're going to have to give a job talk. So outside of academia, we do job talks for industry roles. And we give advice on PowerPoint presentations and helping you with their job talk. So I'll just end with that. If you get a offer, hopefully you're fortunate to get an offer, you want to negotiate your salary. And sometimes that's also a foreign process for students. They always think that's that business practice to negotiate. And it's the opposite. You always want to negotiate, but do it tactfully. And we give advice on that, on how to negotiate your salary and other aspects of compensation. So if you have a job offer, you want us to take a look at it, walk you through on how to negotiate with your hiring manager, we provide that advice too. So I'll stop there and just kind of summarize that. Essentially, going back to the 4 components of a successful job search. We talked about self-reflection, the importance of networking, talking about your professional narrative and the job application materials. And OCS, we really coach you through all aspects of this process throughout your career development. So you feel free to reach out via email, or if you want to schedule an advising appointment, we have a lot of availability and you have access to us. But I'll pause there. I think we have 10 minutes. If you have any questions, I'm happy to elaborate on the aspects of what I talked about. So thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Again, thank you, Jacob, for quite an impressive chat with us. If anybody has any questions, feel free. I just wanted to point out, I did share this link here, which has the physics alumni. It's pretty simple.
Oh, cool.
Alumni.
There you go.
Great.
I'll have to take a look at that too.
Right on. I have a bit of a question.
Yeah,
so in terms of this networking sort of subsection that you spoke about, I guess what you showed, I mean, it's excellent, but a lot of this strategy seems to be highly, I guess, like premeditated in the sense that the person initiates this sort of strat already with something in mind. They sit down at their computer, they're sending out these emails. It's been well thought out. So in my, experience, sometimes it might be that you're just wandering about in the streets of New Haven and you wind up being at a cocktail bar around somebody that you hear is an alumni, and then all of a sudden you put in a situation that you haven't necessarily kind of rehearsed to be in.
Yeah.
So what sort of advice do you think you can provide us with this type of scenario where, I'm not saying that people should be like sleeper agents, knowing that there's somebody there, but like how can one self-assess for this type of situation? Because I think this happens more often than not.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really good question. So I think one is, I think going back to the professional narrative, I think if you have a pretty good idea of the core of what your narrative is, and you just tweak that on the spot, I think that's really helpful. Because describing your research, if you could boil it down to a couple of sentences, right? I think you could deliver that to any audience, really. But depending on if you meet somebody, and let's say you know the person, or maybe you don't know the person, I think a simple introduction of, oh, I heard you actually from the department. I'm currently a PhD student. I work in this department. I just want to introduce myself. My name is Fernando. What brings you to New Haven? Just like having that small, small talk essentially, and that will kind of introduce the topic of just learning more about them as an individual. And you'll be surprised at small talk on how a lot of the conversations start in that way. When you go to mixers or you go to departmental events, you're surrounded by a lot of different people. And by those ways to introduce yourself in small ways kind of opens up a larger conversation of like, oh, what are you doing here at Yale? Tell me more about your research. Then you can ask what they're doing. And then that's where you can kind of think more about other questions you can learn about, or you always ask, like, do you mind me reaching out to you on LinkedIn to have more of a further conversation about what you do? I think those are all great ways to kind of just break the ice.
Sure. And then in terms of like how you were mentioning, like, yeah, I'll reach out to you. So how long is it appropriate to wait to reach out such that one doesn't come off as being too desperate?
So I would say that if it's at like a mixer, you meet somebody. I think usually even in academic conferences, if you meet somebody and you they say, oh yeah, follow up with me and we could always chat. Even just like a thank you note, like 24 hours after the conference. Hey, thank you so much for chatting with me. Really, it was nice speaking with you. Looking forward to staying in touch.
Right.
Or even something on LinkedIn. 24 hours is a good way to do it. But then as far as the follow-up, I would say within like 40 hours to a week, like if you wanted to follow up with them, I think it's pretty standard to kind of do it within that timeline. I think the way you're describing it is almost like dating, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, yeah. You don't reach out too soon and
Right.
burn the bridges.
Exactly.
But yeah, I would say at least acknowledge and say like just a quick thank you, like it was nice to meet you. Connect with them on LinkedIn, and then you could always send a more in-depth email,
Sure.
later on.
Is it the same with like when they give you a business card? Because when I was in there, I never knew what to do with them, and I'd be like, okay, cool, and then I just had a collection of business.
Yeah, so add them on LinkedIn. So the first thing we use LinkedIn is it's utilized in different ways, and you'll be surprised that a lot of the professionals and employers will utilize it. So I would just say add them on LinkedIn and send them like a quick little note. I think that's probably the best way to do it, to kind of just make sure that you acknowledge, that you met with them and to kind of put yourself on their radar. And then as far as the follow-up, I mean, depending on when you feel like is the right time, the appropriate time to reach out, it varies. Because as far as building the network too, what I didn't talk about was maintaining it too, right? I mean, I think a lot of people will invest time into building it up, but they overlook the maintenance of it. And you'll be surprised, the maintenance happens in really subtle ways where, if you connect with somebody, and let's say you're not looking for a job now, but 6 months, a year down the road, like you want to reconnect with that person, you don't want to send them a blind, like out of the blue, like, hey, we met a year ago. I think it's usually like small little emails that you send them like every other month. Hey, just wanted to drop a note, like here's a small little update, what's going on in my research, or there's an academic conference that's coming up. Just wanted to mention and throw it your way to see if you're interested. Small little gestures is the way to maintain your network and maintain those connections. And the same goes, I think, for when you're meeting people at mixers, small little notes. Where if you feel like you're not in a position to have that conversation, or you don't feel comfortable having those conversations right away, send those initial gestures because they go a long way for sure.
So the OCS is open for grad students and postdocs.
Correct.
Is there an equivalent for undergraduates?
So there's a different team for undergraduate students. So my colleague Hanja and I, we focus specifically on graduate students and postdocs, and that's graduate schools in the arts and sciences, not professional schools. For undergraduates, yeah, we have a whole team of advisors. So as I said, we have a team of 19. Half of the office is dedicated for undergraduates.
And for alumni, what's the thing? You said they go somewhere else. So if I am a Yale alumnus,
yeah,
and I want to reach out to you,
you still have access to us as an alum.
Okay.
So whether you are a PhD student or a postdoc, when you leave Yale, you still have access to us. So what you want to do is the Yale Career Link, the way you schedule advising appointments, you want to put your permanent email address, and you'll still have access to that, and you'll be able to schedule advising appointments. And if you don't see anything, simple email. Shoot us an email. We could always schedule something on the back end. So as I mentioned, you don't have to be reaching out now. Really, when you feel you're comfortable and you want to have those conversations, we, as I mentioned, talk to students at all stages and trainees at all stages. I wouldn't recommend like 3 months in advance of going on a job search. I've had those conversations and it's stressful. I mean, people find jobs, but it's a stressful way of planning your career development. I wouldn't recommend that.
Actually have another question.
Yeah, go for it.
So
yeah,
for how often, I guess there's a difference between how often you did, like you as a PhD did it versus you advising us,
yeah,
like to update your CV to add new things, because I don't think I've added anything to my CV since I've applied for graduate school and I'm a fourth year now.
Fourth year? Have you been doing any activities on the side? Like sitting on committees, reviewing grants?
Yeah, I just haven't done anything.
Okay.
How often do you think people should like tweak it? I don't know. Or just like starting in application season and then you do.
Yeah, I know. So it's a good question. And just your general interest, are you thinking about it?
No, like in general, I'm not.
What? So I think there's a difference between adding things on your CV just for the sake of adding things versus thinking strategically on what you want to apply or where your interests are.
That's a good point.
So going back to that transferable skill set. So like, let's say you are interested in like leadership. There's different ways you could do that within your department. Sit on committees that organize events like these. There's different student groups. They have a whole leadership team. You could always get involved with different student groups. So I would think that it's more strategically thinking about how you could add experiences for the sake of just adding experiences. But if you're in your fourth, fifth year and you don't really have much beyond just doing your research, I would start thinking about that now. Because usually when you start applying for jobs, you want to start thinking about that at least a year in advance. And I think that's where you can start thinking more about the skills you need. And then once you start thinking about the skills you need to build, then you can start thinking about what experiences you need to add that on your CV or resume. Yeah. A lot of information.
I have just a general question. So let's just entertain the idea that somebody in here is just drowning in job offers, right? So it's usually, yeah, right. It's usually good form to let the people that you're not gonna accept the job offer for well ahead of time that you're not gonna accept it.
Yeah.
What's your general advice about this sort of scenario?
So it's a good position to be in. And the reason why it's that is that because when it comes back to negotiating, you're going to be in the best position when you have other job offers to negotiate. Beyond that, you really have your own experiences that you've done, why you're qualified for the role, and this is why you deserve X salary. And then also what the market research says. So usually when you are applying for jobs, sometimes you have to indicate the salary range in the job application. You want to avoid that. You want the employer to be the first one to offer whatever salary range it is. So that's where you're going to be in the best position. So beyond that, really have other offers to show them, hey, actually I applied for this role. I got this offer. Can you match that? So it's a good position to be in. But as far as notifying them, when you want to notify them, it depends on, I guess, your interest in the role. If you feel like you're going to roll it out real fast and you don't want to move forward in the interview process, be respectful and follow up with the hiring manager. And the etiquette is honestly a phone call. I wouldn't drop an email. I'd have a phone call with them and let them know, like, hey, thank you so much for interviewing me. I really enjoyed my time speaking with X, Y, and Z. I have other offers that are a better fit for me. Just want to let you know I want to rescind my application.
Sure.
But I think the more strategic way to think about it is, which organizations you could see yourself at, and not ruling out the ones that you don't want to work at yet, because that could always be valuable when you negotiate offers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so just sort of like sleeping on it and then
you can, yeah, absolutely. And usually when you get a job offer, it doesn't happen all at once, to be honest with you. I think usually the way it plays out is that you finish a second round interview, you're finishing a final round interview, you get one offer that requires an X deadline of when you need to respond by, and then you're still doing a third interview. So it's all staggered. Really, that's the way it really plays out with the students and postdocs I work with. So it all kind of comes down to where if you have an offer but you're really excited about another company that you have a second, interview with, you completed a second round interview with them, you always want to follow up with them. Be like, hey, I actually received a job offer. Can we expedite the process?
Sure.
So there's different ways to leverage, the job offers. And that's where OCS really comes in, because it really comes down to situational.
Right.
How to navigate that. So it's hard to give general advice about that. But I think the advice and appointments, we'll sit down with you, we'll help you strategize on how to do that.
Cool.
Yeah. Any other questions?
So there are no more questions. We've reached the hour, but let's actually thank Jacob once again for joining us. And if anybody wants to reach out, I guess the contact information was on the slides, but I will get the slides from you, and then Victoria and I will make them public for everybody to just look back on.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Fernando. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.